Okay.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'll go ahead and share my screen so that you all can see that. All right. Can everybody see our presentation okay? Great. All right. Well, hi, everyone, and thanks for having us. It's really exciting to hear about this group at Colorado State. So my name is Alana. I'm an assistant professor at Lewis and Clark College in the Environmental Studies department here, and I run the Regenerating Land Lab here. And it's been really fun to work with Birgit for quite some time now, trying to understand various dynamics of forest cover, different production and development programs, and the impacts that these aspects have to smallholders and communities in southeastern Mexico. And I think Birgit can confirm this or deny this. I think that we originally kind of came to some of our questions from really different viewpoints and different goals, but we found a lot of synergy through that. So I am a broadly trained geographer who started a lot of my work in pretty classic physical geography projects. So a lot of the questions that I develop first and foremost are about biophysical patterns and landscape. And from that, I kind of stem into additional aspects that influence landscapes. So sociocultural aspects of landscape, policy aspects of landscape, economic aspects of landscape. And this is where that idea of transdisciplinarity that you all are foregrounding becomes really important. So with that, I'll let Birgit introduce herself.
Well, I guess we already had some introduction of myself, and it's a little bit difficult to tell, and it might be boring. I mean, I've been now doing research for 30 years, though. I mean, I've done a couple of things, but yes, recently I'm really very interested in the effects of the Mexican policy in the countryside. There have been a couple of very, very important programs. I still do some research on migration, and also because most of my colleagues are conservation ecologists. So I also started doing a little bit with them, but mostly on the human side. So working with communities, for example, regarding jaguar conservation. But still, I mean, my focus is on agricultural systems. I'm a trained agronomist and then did my PhD in geography, which was a perfect combination. Okay, I think we should now go to what we propose to do and talk a little bit about the Sembrando Vida program. So, and I first give you a brief introduction to what is this program. I mean, some of you might heard about it, some might not have heard about it. I mean, and what the first slides, this is more kind of the very official governmental presentation of what is Sembrando Vida. So Sembrando Vida, it's a hybrid, or at the beginning it was something we really couldn't really understand what it is, because we thought it's an agricultural program because they talked about implementing agroforestry systems in the countryside, but then it was located in the Secretaría de Bienestar, the Ministry of Welfare. So this first didn't really fit in our heads, But yeah, but the other part of the discourse about Sembrando Vida was really about giving the farmers, the smallholders, back their identity. And so it was from the beginning, it was let's say it was challenging. So it was launched in 2019 when the president AMLO, I'm only thinking about what is the name? Alana, help me. No.
López Obrador.
López Obrador, Manuel López Obrador. Sorry, I just had a blink. came into government, because everybody calls him AMLO, but this is just kind of his nickname. So this was when the program was started in 2019. Next slide, please. Let's see if you can move it to the next slide. So the main goals of the program are to combat rural poverty by providing direct support to smallholders, which means a monthly payment, and also promote sustainable agriculture and also conserve the environment, restore degraded lands through agroforestry practices. So I think this is really a lot for one program, but that's okay. And the target audience are smallholders, which means people who are owners. And in Mexico, there is this ejido system, or at least have access to 2.5 hectares of land. And I think this is a very interesting feature of the program, because former programs like Pro Campo, there it was really necessary that you had some kind of, not a legal title in the sense of the American land titles or the German land titles, but but there are also a lot of people working in these ejidos which have no formal land tenure. So this was really a very good move that they have also been incorporated. Whenever they get hold of 2.5 land to them by some other people in the community. Next one, please. So how it works, I mean, smallholders, they have to establish agroforestry systems by planting a mix of trees, timber and trees and crops, and they need to commit to sustainable practices. So for example, it wasn't allowed to use agrochemicals. I mean, in some cases they still do, but the case was not to do it. And how were they engaged in all this? Monthly payments. It was at the beginning a little bit more than $200 a month, which doesn't sound a lot, but for the countryside in Mexico, this was quite a bit. They got technical assistance and training in sustainable farming methods. This all sounds very nice, and I won't deny that in some cases it was really very successful, but we also learned that it was not really that simple, because most of the technicians they employed, I mean, they were very young and not really very, very, maybe knowledgeable about the techniques, but not so much knowledgeable about how to deal with like 50-year plus old smallholders. And we know farmers, they can be a challenge all over the world. And the farmers also got seeds and supplies for agroforestry and reforestation projects. By reforestation projects, it's always on the same parcel, like this 2.5 hectares. I hope you have no problems with hectares, because right now I don't know how many acres this is, but yeah, I mean, you should. So then next slide, please.
We do, we're good. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, but there have also been a lot of challenges, which also was admitted by the program. Concern about deforestation in previously untouched areas, because the case was that this was really very tempting for smallholders, and it was originally geared to do this on fallow lands or on degraded lands or pasture lands. But some of the farmers didn't have access to these lands or didn't really understand what was meant by this. So really quite a bit of forest was slashed and burned, and also kind of mixed success in creating long-term sustainable change. But yeah, the achievements set by the government, over 1.3 million hectares were now reforested. And if you're talking now about reforestation, we really talk about these parcels, which is a mix of timber, fruit trees, and sometimes still crops. And then the participation of thousands of smallholders across rural Mexico. approximately 400,000. This sounds very much, but it's not really that much if we think that we have 2.5 million of smallholders which live under the same conditions. So it's not really, it's a little bit smaller than they want to paint us in the coverage. I mean, if you hear 400,000, it sounds a lot, but if you compare it to 2.5 million, which are in the same situation, it can be a little bit taken with more precaution. Next one, please. So this is now also from a recent, not that recent, but a report from the Secretariat of Well-being, where they talk about the strengths and the challenging of impeding working with Sembrando Vida in the region. In the region basically means all over Mexico. Most of the smallholders, they really like to do it. I mean, it's still a questions, and we made a lot of interviews. I mean, some people, they liked it because of the money, which is understandable. Some people really liked it because it gave them the chance now to work more plots. According to the welfare secretariats, there have been good communication between the farmers and the technicians, and so on. And natural factors in the region were also good to do this agroforestry plots. But they also mentioned some challenges, you know, individualism. In many ejidos, there is this problem of alcoholism. So people really, they are not so motivated. And so on. I mean, all we know, long distances, and many ejidos also insecurity and violence. There was also in some ejidos conflict and resistance. And then they also talk about the lack of knowledge and the dialect. I mean, I was a little bit annoyed by the fact that they use the word dialect, because people, they really speak their language, and it's not just some dialect of something, but you know, okay. So this was what the ministry kind of reported. So this was kind of a very short overview. So once again, the basics. They pay the farmers. So the farmers basically then have to do what the technicians tell them. You know, they have to do the agroforestry plots. They also have their monthly meetings, and they get their monthly paycheck. It's not a check, you know, they get the plastic. And they, at the beginning, they were very rigid with this, which trees they can plant, but then they kind of encountered that it's really very difficult to provide all the trees. And then over the time, they loosened up a little bit, and they also allowed farmers to produce their own little trees. Okay, I think we should now go to the next part. No, sorry. Yeah, so that's good that you skipped this. So, which is the research we worked on, kind of having a look at Sembrando Vida from the perspective, is this really a coherent policy, you know? And what are really the rhetoric and realities of the Mexican Sembrando Vida programs seen under the perspective of the Sustainable Development Goals? I mean, and this has been done by several people. I mean, yeah, 3 students, Sofia Madera, Grecia, yeah, and Sofia and Rima, they're also professors at the University of St. Andrews, and Sophie is at the University of Sherbrooke. So this is not only my research, but we did it all together. Next slide, please. Yeah, we know about all this. You know, there are so many global challenges we have to address. You know, the biodiversity crisis, the climate change crisis, the increasingly bigger and bigger gap between the richest and the poor people. I don't think I have to tell you more about this. and this was all tried to address by the Sustainable Development Goals from 2015. Next slide, please. And yeah, and now our look at Sembrando Vida. So what is really policy coherence? So we have all these challenges with indivisibility and interconnectedness of the SDGs in its implementation. So we can't just focus on one, but need to see them all together. And this policy coherent sustainable development aims to maximize synergies across goals and policies while minimizing negative trade-offs. But policy coherence is often determined by political and not neutral factors, and is influenced by some ideas and also institutional processes. And this is where we are then getting with Sembrando Vida. And there is therefore a need to further understand the factors which influence the initial intentions for policy coherence and how this might be influenced by context over time. You know, I mean, once again, the program started with one goal or several goals, and then over time it developed. And normally policy coherence is really studied at the program level, like now in Sembrando Vida, which is really the scale at which the policy is implemented. Next one, please. Okay, yeah, just a little reminder. I mean, there are really structural barriers to rural development in Mexico. I mean, most of the countryside, it's still very poor. Farmers are highly vulnerable to climate change. And we also have seen the limitations of past programs. One example, Procampo. And therefore, to address these barriers and vulnerability to climate change, the Mexican government launched Sembrando Vida in 2019. Next one, we already said this for power. Okay, so, and what are now the aims and the research questions of what we did? We wanted to explore the intentions and contributions over time of the rural development program Sembrando Vida. And we say multifaceted because after a while it seems, I mean, some people called it Frankenstein. I really don't want to use this word because it's really a little bit, maybe too much, but let's say it has many faceted. And to assess the policy coherence for sustainable development of Sembrando Vida. So therefore our research questions, how and why did the government initiate the Sembrando Vida program, and how did its goals change over time? Second, does Sembrando Vida's stated intentions and implementations demonstrate effective climate change and policy for the environment? And does Sembrando Vida contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, providing evidence for a program achieving policy coherent sustainable development? I know these are really very big questions, but you know, sometimes you need to think big. Okay, next one. I think was not based on fieldwork. Of course, we have been doing a lot of field work over the years, but especially this one, it was more an analysis of official government websites, and we had interviews with key informants to trace the origin and evolution and the characteristics of the program. But here I have to say, at least at the beginning, it was so difficult to talk to these people. They could tell us, and some of them are
I think we're having some troubles with the internet connection. It started to break up a bit.
Okay, and then also, what? I should speak up more?
No. The internet connection is breaking down a little bit. Perhaps if you pause your video for a moment, it might help with the audio.
Yeah, the thing is, okay, I can do this. Okay. Yeah, I hope
Perfect.
now
Thank
it's
you.
better. Yeah,
It's
sorry.
holding up right now. Yes, it's perfect. No problem.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, but that's the humid tropics. So what we also did, we did an analysis of the mañaneras. So what are these mañaneras? I don't know if you know that López Obrador and now also the new president, Claudia Sheinbaum, every morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, they talk over the television for up to 4 hours and comment on everything. So, I mean, now it's not really fair to say we, because I really delegated this to my students, because it's really a little bit painful to listen to these mañaneras. So they then went through the transcripts and tried to filter out everything said by the president of the Sembrando Vida, to understand about the official intentions behind the program. And we also did a media content analysis to explore how Sembrando Vida was perceived by the press. And at the end, we found 17 articles from both Mexican and international newspapers on the Sembrando Vida program and its relationship to climate change, deforestation, and reforestation. Next one, please. So one of our results were the timeline. So yeah, the first two ones are maybe not that interesting, but you can see it was in 2006 that López Obrador was the first time running for the presidency, and by this time he already had an idea on how to do reforestation in 4 states: Veracruz, Chiapas, Tabasco, and Campeche. He didn't won the presidency, so he tried it again in 2012. And this was the second time he was trying to come up with a program for reforestation. And then in 2018, then he was really voted and became president. Then it was when the Sembrando Vida program was officially announced to combat rural poverty and against the degradation of the environment, and that the program fall under the Ministry of Welfare. But then there was not really a lot known about it to the public, and it was really, everybody was also very surprised that there was no kind of period of trying to do it. It was just implemented with 400,000 farmers at. No, that's not true. I mean, he started in 8 Mexican states in 2019, but then by 2020 it was extended to 19 Mexican states, and then it was in 2021 that it was really, then the discourse was really on, this is the perfect program against climate change, which wasn't really much on the agenda before. And this was also very much because it was presented by the Mexican foreign minister at the COP26 in Glasgow, and it was presented at the largest reforestation program. And right now, the next president, Claudia Sheinbaum, she was doing the same thing in Brazil. So yeah, we need to plant more trees. And then there was the next iteration of the program that they extended it to some Central American countries, which, I mean, not that you get me wrong, I think that's fine. And I think Mexico is really a country which could also help its more poorer neighbors. But the very strange thing was that the money wasn't sent to the government, for example, in Belize or in El Salvador, but it was basically a direct transfer from Mexico to the producers. And this is, yeah, okay, I shouldn't go on with this. And then in 2023, it was officially declared that the Sembrando Vida program aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals. Next one, please. Yeah, I mean, this is just where you see the little star. This is where the Sembrando Vida program attends this sustainable development goals. I mean, it's basically, if you see, it's always the same. It's through the agroforestry program, or it's through the monthly payments. Next one. So then the results, the rhetoric and reality of the Sembrando Vida program. So now we come deforestation versus reforestation. So it was promoted as a reforestation program. But as we have already heard, a lot of participants cleared forests, and according to some sources, it was really a lot, you know, of forest which was slashed for Sembrando Vida. I mean, the program, they really complained a lot about it and said, this is false, that's not true, you know, I won't discuss this. I have no idea about the real numbers, but we have also seen this in Calakmul, that farmers, yes, they slashed down forest. Regarding the technical support and the implementation challenges, there was, in many ejidos, was really limited training and follow-up, low survival rates for planted trees, logistical issues. They didn't really find the skilled personnel because it was designed like this. There were groups of farmers, like always, 25 farmers, and then these 24 farmers, they got assistance from 2 technicians. I mean, at the end, these technicians, they had to deal with more ejidos, but at the end, they needed so much technicians to be hired, I mean, at the same times, and they really couldn't find enough people. And yeah, and I mean, also Sembrando Vida had a very big budget. It was the 3rd largest budgeted social program during the presidency of López Obrador. At the end, the beneficiaries were only 14%. I mean, I also mentioned this 200,000 in face of 2.5 million smallholders. So it's 14% of this country's smallholders. I mean, that's not bad for them, but you know, I think they should maybe tone down a little bit their discourse. Next one, Alana, please. Yeah, and then now we're coming back to the political influence and policy drift. So change over time from an emphasis on poverty reduction to climate change, mitigation through reforestation, which was really very useful at the COP in Glasgow. And then the role of this daily mañaneras, which was really also meant to influence the beneficiaries. So 22% of the beneficiaries, they really believe that the benefits come directly from the president. And this is also, if you go to the countryside, they don't say, you know, this is a nice program we got from the government. No, they tell you, eso es del presidente. Como que si el presidente personalmente would have given them the money, you know? So this was really so much on the people that they really associate this with the president. And I have my certain issues or problems with this. And then another thing is, I mean, I don't want to fall in this what about, but you know, there is the Sembrando Vida program. It's so high on the discourse, but on the other side, I mean, Mexico in the last 6 years, it was really about I mean, so much about fossils, so much about big infrastructure projects, you know, all about these big mega projects like the Tren Maya, which also damaged the environment very much. You know, I mean, just to point this out too. Next one, Alana, please. So yeah, and the discussion, how and why did the Sembrando Vida program emerge? It always had multiple goals and aimed for policy coherence by addressing poverty reduction and environmental issues. But these stated intentions shifted over time towards more climate change emphasis in line with this political opportunity in Mexico on the world stage. But outcomes did not always align with intentions. Then there was also the co-option for Sembrando Vida for migration goals. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, one can change or adapt goals over time, but in the case of Sembrando Vida, it might have been, a little bit not so good. And Sembrando Vida did appear to align with some SDGs, but change in goals over time appeared to be due to political drift rather than policy coherence. You know, when there was a chance to present one aspect or include another aspect in the Sembrando Vida, they did it. So yes, political drift can be positive if it's adaptive and monitored, but otherwise it can really manifest as political opportunism. Next one. Yeah, so our conclusions. Yes, it holds promise for addressing rural poverty and environmental goals in Mexico, but its implementation has faced significant challenges. And I think it also still faces a lot of challenges now that they announced the next round of Sembrando Vida. And there are really limited climate and reforestation goals. Issues such as policy drift, lack of technical support, unintended deforestation really weaken the program's contribution to sustainable development. And then, the political motives, and then the objectives for the environment. Political motives have sometimes overshadowed Sembrando Vida's goals for the environment, potentially turning it into a tool for consolidating rural political support instead of focusing on effective climate change. I mean, don't get me wrong, it does something for the climate, but it could be a little bit more. So our recommendations. So Sembrando Vida should adopt clearer and well-monitored strategies to align social and goals for the environment. And it also should involve more local stakeholders, which is also crucial for meaningful implementation. So, and what I say now, this is more from our fieldwork. I mean, people, at the beginning, they felt overrun by the technicians. I mean, which basically wanted to teach them how to do agriculture, which they have been doing for 20 or 30 years. So they felt really not appreciated in their knowledge, but they did it because they said, if we don't do it, we don't get our support. Yeah, and addressing implementation gaps is essential for Sembrando Vida to fulfill its potential as a sustainable program. So I think now it's the last slide, and then I will give to, yes. So the wider context, policy coherence requires participatory, democratic, and accountable decision-making. So that's nice. That's really nice if the president and a few of his inner circle come up with a nice program. But, you know, I mean, this is a program for the countryside, though. So farmers should really be involved. And this has also been kind of critiques of Procampo and many programs. And they repeat it over and over again. And more research is needed to explore policy coherence within and across programs as well as policies. And policy coherence should be assessed over time to capture policy or program drift. Thank you so much. I hope it wasn't too fast and not too much, but there is still, I think, at the end, time for questions. Okay, Alana, I think now it's you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Birgit. So that was a really nice overview of Sembrando Vida and kind of the national status and approach to Sembrando Vida and how it's aligning with now international policy goals through the Sustainable Development Goals. Next up, we're really going to zoom in from this national scale into a single ejido community. And we recently published a paper about this to present how different levels of alignment, or what we saw, misalignment of individual producers within Sembrando Vida can actually have material impacts to the forest that the program is saying that it regrows, essentially. And for a background to this work, I don't need to remind you all of the wicked problem of deforestation, but also maybe the wicked problem of discourses around deforestation. So we hear again and again discourses of these one-way relationships that land uses have with forest, where the demand for resources causes deforestation and forest degradation to landscapes like this one. However, there is life in tropical forests and all forests essentially after their use. And this picture shows that, which I really love. It shows complex, real-world tropical forest landscapes where patches of regenerating forest exist alongside pastures, alongside patches of mature forest, alongside forest and trees being used as infrastructure. These are the dynamics of a real-world tropical forest that have existed for millennia. And this forest spans the southeastern Mexican states of Quintana Roo and Campeche and defines the northern margin of Central America's Mesoamerican biological corridor. So a very important ecological area, biological corridors are. I'll call this region from now on just the corridor because Mesoamerican biological corridor is quite a mouthful. But almost 80% of forest in this corridor is home to the communities that Birgit introduced, ejidos. And ejidos are home to folks whose livelihoods often depend on using forest resources. Traditionally, forest regeneration in ejidos has been part of shifting land use systems, here often called milpa. And as such, both livelihoods of all these folks living in ejidos and the important international ecological conservation designation in this region depend on the process of basically carefully managed and understood patterns of forest regrowth and the resulting connectivity of forests that regrowth provides. At the same time, numerous agrarian programs aim to manage resources in, define, and simplify forest configurations like the ones we just saw in the corridor. And to date, the market interests of production within these programs and international conservation initiatives have really come together and coalesced to use conservation concepts and ideas and frameworks about forest to incentivize smallholders to transition traditional shifting land uses like milpa in the corridor into modernized permanent production that's going to be more efficient for them in the long use, essentially. However, research at all scales, from global scale all the way down to case studies here in the corridor, show that despite that kind of rhetoric and discourse, shifting agriculture continues in most communities. And this brings us to Sembrando Vida, which we've been talking about for the past little while. So, of course, in 2019, Sembrando Vida begins this new agroforestry program that claims and promotes to bring a triple win-win-win solution to individual communities through simultaneous environmental, economic, and sociocultural co-benefits. Really, what's different about this is that this program has been framed to bring these three co-benefits by embracing shifting milpa agriculture and shifting land uses of all types, smallholder and indigenous perspectives now, and this new forest dynamic, which isn't often included, regeneration and reforestation, essentially. And this shift highlights the role that potentially new framings and new discourse of forest land use dynamics can play for forest cover and livelihood in the corridor. So we wanted to examine this shift and if it's actually making an impact. And to do that, we zoomed into a single case study ejido called Las Flores, where many participants are now, or producers are now participating in Sembrando Vida. And to set the context for Las Flores, we first have to understand Mexico's agrarian program history, essentially, and set Sembrando Vida against some of these previous programs. So these ejidos, they were established by the Mexican government after the revolution and granted rights to communally use land. And in the corridor, ejidos were formalized in the 1960s, and they were basically set up to develop Mexico's forest land through agriculture and forestry practices primarily. Some ejidos pick one, some ejidos do both, some ejidos do many diverse land uses, all sorts of things. Las Flores, our case study ejido, was established in 1971 in the corridor. And ejido land uses have long been governed by a variety of federal programs, and these programs took a neoliberal turn in the early 90s with the major programs of Pro Campo and Pro Agro. And these programs incentivized cash crop agriculture, which was permanent, and livestock production, pretty much in place of traditional shifting land uses, so milpa agricultural production, which they actually framed to cause deforestation and degradation. Now, Sembrando Vida has emerged, and it's actually been stated in its promotion since 2019 as anti-neoliberal, so being framed as new and different and providing new opportunities than these other previous neoliberal programs did. So that's kind of an interesting shift in rhetoric. So for our research, we collected policy documents from these three programs, Pro Campo, Pro Agro, and Sembrando Vida. And we performed semi-structured interviews with land users in Las Flores. And what was really cool is the interviews were facilitated through this community mapping exercise where folks were able to add their perspectives and anecdotes and actual physical annotations to big maps of forest regeneration and land use that we created. And together, these data characterized discourses, one for Mexican agrarian programs and one for Las Flores land users. And defining land user discourses within Las Flores revealed essentially a long history of land use and the diverse dynamics that these land uses create in forests. For example, land users reference semi-subsistence, milpa agriculture, this shifting agricultural production, and apiculture, so beekeeping, as traditional activities for Mayan communities, which have been happening long before Las Flores even existed. Then, when Las Flores was established, these traditional activities became main economic activities after formalization. So it started creating their livelihoods from these. Following the emergence of Pro Campo, Las Flores saw essentially the addition of large-scale permanent land use. Most notably here was livestock production, so big pastures for animals, and the rental of large areas of the ejido's communal land to outside groups. So folks that had never lived in Las Flores before, mostly these folks were Mennonites, and they took over large areas of land on multi-decadal leases to produce cash crops. Now, 60 individual Sembrando Vida producers at the time that we did this work, both ejidatarios, or those that have had essentially rights to use land from the ejido, and folks that haven't had rights to use land but now do under Sembrando Vida, have each converted 2.5 hectare plots. And these plots have been established in areas that were previously second growth regenerating forest and milpa agriculture matrices. So those are the areas that Las Flores chose to put their Sembrando Vida plots. And overall, land users associated traditional apiculture with conserved forest configurations, milpa shifting agriculture with dynamic patches of forest regeneration, and cash crop agriculture with permanent patterns of deforestation. However, the land user discourses started to diverge basically based on the role that agrarian programs played in that permanent deforestation from cash crop. For example, ejidatarios associate cash crop agriculture and resulting deforestation with the implementation of all agrarian programs, including Sembrando Vida. They don't see a difference between Sembrando Vida's implementation and impact and the implementation and impact of ProCampo and ProAgro, especially since it's targeting the 2.5 hectares of second growth forest and milpa. On the other hand, traditionally landless folks that have been newly granted access to produce under Sembrando Vida describe that this deforestation is not because of programs, but it's because the groups that rent land from the ejido to produce within programs don't have a Mayan heritage and worldview. And they express support for the reforestation initiatives under Sembrando Vida because it grants these traditionally landless folks access to their Mayan heritage and their worldview. Meanwhile, when analyzing agrarian policy documents, it was no surprise to see that ProCampo and ProAgro excluded regeneration and reforestation concepts and discussed forest conservation basically only in terms of land sparing. But Sembrando Vida deviated from this trend quite a bit by incorporating a lot of discourse around shifting agriculture and milpa and traditional production into its promotional materials. So, for example, there was a big blog and still is a blog online about Sembrando Vida, and they had a huge post from milpa to the table, essentially promoting the connection between Sembrando Vida and milpa. But in practice, Sembrando Vida didn't deviate from these previous agrarian programs because it actually guides users to standardize and make permanent their land use. And although Sembrando Vida plots are 2.5 hectares, you can add new Sembrando Vida plots right next door. So essentially, you could expand your Sembrando Vida by adding extra plots, or your family adding extra plots. And in contrast to the promotional blog post, Anahita Tarya described a lot of surprise when Sembrando Vida technicians told her to actually take apart her milpa, and that plants that she planted through Sembrando Vida weren't able to survive the heat and intensity of the Yucatan when the regeneration process within milpa was removed from that plot. And comparing policy and land user discourses revealed essentially multiple patterns of these material forest dynamics as the program becomes interpreted by land users and then implemented on the landscape. So that's what this map is showing. So individuals described the outcome of land use and forest cover relationships, mostly that deforestation from agrarian programs has caused not the replacement of traditional land uses, but the displacement of these traditional land uses to new parts of Las Flores. And you can see obviously the large cash crop agriculture areas, but the blue dot here is where Sembrando Vida is being established within Las Flores. And ejidatarios have decided that all should be in one area in case it results in displacement of milpa again. So essentially, if you have 2.5 hectare plots all next to each other, it effectively results in a similar landscape pattern. So what do all of these mean together? First, land user discourses showed us that essentially local support for agrarian programs and specifically Sembrando Vida's role in conservation and regeneration follow trends in an individual's land access history. And second, we learned that discourses of agrarian programs really align and emerge as the newest iteration of neoliberal agrarian programs in Mexico. So Sembrando Vida aligns with these neoliberal discourses that were occurring in the past, despite the massive promotion that it is anti-neoliberal. And third, diverse levels of alignment, enrollment, and participation with program discourses lead to an increase in the number of land uses of all types across Las Flores. And as such, the overall forest connectivity and the long-term sustainability of traditional land uses in diverse forest matrices become impacted from that. So what's next for us? Maybe we can kind of wind down and have general time for questions, and we can talk about next steps within those questions as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Super interesting. There's so much to unpack and to think with in this complex context that you have analyzed and laid out for us. Does anybody have any questions online? I think, Eduardo, you had a couple like punctual questions.
Yeah, I put one when Birgit was speaking, that how does the World Resources Institute knows or directly links the deforestation with the Sembrando Vida? Is it that a consequence, or is deforestation happening anyway as a tendency that has been happening for a long time, and it just continues? How do they link it, and how do they analyze the trends rather than the overall deforestation happening in the country?
Yeah, this is a little bit, I don't know how they did it in all cases, but I remember what was done in Calakmul. I mean, this is the region which is very close to where I'm working. They just did, they overflew the region with drones, and then it was really very easy to see the new Sembrando Vida plots. But you know, your question is all right. I don't think they did it at the national level. And also, Alana, you remember that we had this discussion during the GLP conference. So it was also very much disputed if this is 100% correct. But and therefore, I mean, I'm very reluctant to say, you know, that's the exact number of deforestation. But, you know, I mean, even what we have seen, I could just say there was extra deforestation, you know, I mean, so far, but you are right. I mean, and what was the next question, if there was any?
No, I only had that one. Yeah.
Okay.
I only had that one because it sometimes is extrapolating from one place and then like no direct link to the cause. No, like deforestation may be happening even without the Sembrando Vida. So I don't see that analysis there, and I would like to know more, like to have it more detailed, because you know, yeah, that's it.
It also, I think it's a good question, and yeah, it's one that Birgit and I were discussing with a new and emerging research group, which is interested in Sembrando Vida. And really, one thing that we talked about as a research group quite a bit was, you know, how do we now look at the longer time frame of the initial impacts? So some of us looked at Sembrando Vida early on. Some of us jumped into looking at Sembrando Vida kind of later in the program timeline. And we saw really different patterns of trade-offs, of support, of impacts, negative and positive. So you can kind of look at these at different scales, both spatial and temporal, and be like, okay, this is kind of this, we saw deforestation early on, that was reported early on in particular ways. What does that look like now? And at a national scale in Mexico, it does become really hard to quantify because the methods are harrowing. Basically, remote sensing of a national level of forest can be quite challenging. But also, I think your point about dynamic was interesting because, yes, there's deforestation to set up the plot, but then there's reforestation and planting of trees within the plot. So technically, there's this kind of net zero that could be argued for. But then in my work, one thing that I'm quite interested in is, you know, does that reforestation have the same dynamic that forest has had before? And if it doesn't, then there's some sort of socio-ecological impact in that loss of dynamic nature, essentially, or could be. There could be a loss.
Yes, thank you very much. Just one more comment. I think is sometimes I see the idea of evaluating the program to find how to improve it. So sometimes we just go to and this is just a question, no? We should sometimes just go to what is failing, what is not working, while we skip to measure what is working. So I wonder, like, I mean, it's sad to me to hear that it's not working and it's causing deforestation and it is really bad and it is neoliberal. And I'm like, well, then, you know, 6 years of investment and it's worse than before, no? Like, so is that like, is that what we're looking at really? Or is it that we're just focusing on what it needs to improve or the places where it's not working? And does it really have a good impact somewhere else? What is the balance? And I would like to see more quantitative data about that. Like that would be amazing, you know. But anyways, that's my comment, because it's sad to hear that it's not working and it's worse and it's making damage.
Yeah, Hugo, Eduardo. Okay, digo Hugo. Yeah, you are right. You know, and the thing is, there are indeed positive contributions of Sembrando Vida, you know, and I mean, I've been working in Calakmul, which, you know, just to give you an overview, this is really a very, very dry landscape. At the end, it should be forested, but of course there are people. We know about all the stories. So, but we are also working a little bit in, you know, what we call the zona soque. So this is the region between Chiapas and Tabasco, which is really more precipitation, richer soil. There is all this 100 or 1,000 years old culture of cacao plantation, you know, and I just came from there, and they really had very, very good results with Sembrando Vida, but this was also a lot of very, very good coincidence, you know, because at the end it's a federal program, but it also depends who is really in charge of the program at a certain region. And they had the luck, or have the luck, that their, how you call it, the regional encargado, the Sembrando Vida, he was always interested in cacao, you know, and he saw the future. And so he kind of adapted the program and said no, we won't deal with any timber species unless it helps us reforesting the cacao plantations. So, I mean, and now we went to Villahermosa, and there was this Feria del Cacao, and I mean, many Sembrando Vida producers already selling their I mean, not chocolate, but, you know, I mean, there are a lot of positive experiences. So I know, so really the goal should be doing more groundwork, going to different locations, kind of doing case studies. And this is also something we would like to do with this new group Alana was talking about. The thing is, I know I'm always a little bit negative regarding the Sembrando Vida program, because what mostly kind of disturbs me is our president, you know, I mean, maybe I should tone down a little bit. And also, I mean, what I was presented was really what we found on the press, you know, in the press, not on the press. So yes, but you're right. And I mean, and the other thing is, a lot of the people from Sembrando Vida, I mean, this might have changed. They have been very hermetic, you know, it was kind of difficult to get information. But yes, I mean, I never really wanted to say this was all kind of failure, this was all bad, you know. We should really focus on in which region and why was it good, and in another region, what was really, let's call it, the challenges. No, don't get me wrong, I didn't want it to trash the program, but
Oh, thank you very much. That's fantastic.
And
No,
I think,
considering the biases, like the media, just sorry for quick, the media could be with interest, and also double RI could be with some other interest, and we don't know, no, like it's just thank you.
And I mean, some of the media reports, I mean, they were even hard to digest, but, you know, I mean, to read, but, you know, I mean, we just did it according to the protocol, you know, we read through all this, we codified it, and this was what we get. So,
And also, I think this starts to answer Carlos's question too in the chat. Like, how do we improve it? What we're seeing and what we're hoping to communicate, and what the research group that we're working with now is hoping to communicate, is the trade-off. So no, it's not all negative. There's a lot of critique of policy in academia, basically. So that's how a lot of us are trained first. But there are a lot of trade-offs. And even in Las Flores, you know, there's folks that have not had access to these agrarian programs at all. And they've had to find livelihood elsewhere outside of their community. They haven't been able to stay with their families, all these things. Now they can through Sembrando Vida. That's hugely beneficial. And that's in Las Flores. There aren't even aligned discourses between smallholders about the benefits of the program. Some folks think it's negative, many folks think it's very positive. So given all of those diverse perspectives, Birgit's suggestion of doing kind of on the ground work to try to find out where it's working, who is it working for? If it's not working for folks, how can we improve that, is probably a really great next step for Sembrando Vida. How possible that is at a national scale, or now international scale with its expansion into Central America. We'll see.
Just in the sake of time, I want to give Dario the microphone really quickly to ask one quick question, and then we'll probably wrap up right after that, just to respect everybody's time because we've gone a couple minutes over.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I also have kind of a similar question as Eduardo. Like the area you are working, like I'll follow this area, like the Mayan forest is one that has a major deforestation rates. Like, well, my question was that, and also the other one was about the actors. Like in Tabasco, it worked with cacao because there were actors interested on cacao, like the president's sons. So, like, that's another factor that should be considered into this kind of analysis. Like, and that's why I identified, like, it's neoliberal because, but I don't know, like, you consider these kind of elements as well. That's kind of two questions together.
Alana,
Yeah,
could
so-
you start, because I couldn't get all of it because of the internet. Sorry.
Yeah, so I think, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think that you're asking about essentially who are the different actors that are participating in Sembrando Vida and play a role in Sembrando Vida, but also how do those different identities and potentially discourses that come with those identities interact with the program to make it a kind of a deforesting program versus a reforesting program, or successful in terms of socioeconomic benefits, things like that. Is that the question?
No, well, the first one was to identify like the cause of this deforestation on the Mayan rainforest. That is the area you pointed that you are working on, and the causes like related to Eduardo's question. And the other question was like, if you consider how the other actors like are influencing that in one area is the project is working and in others not. And I mentioned that the example of Tabasco with cacao you mentioned as well, like the media covered this case really a lot, and because they have this company of cacao, so they promote the cacao production. That's why it was like a region that worked, but not all the regions have cacao.
So what is the driver of deforestation in this region generally, and then the role of the different actors in that? Birgit, maybe you could speak to the driver of deforestation in the region generally. I think that there are diverse drivers to deforestation in this region.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there is smallholder agriculture, which is still a driver of deforestation. But in other parts of the region, in the Selva Maya, I mean, it's also tourism, you know. I mean, big investment in the region. Recently, a lot of the deforestation was also caused by the construction of the Mayan train. And this was not this shouldn't be underestimated. But of course, the deforestation numbers, they are not as terrible as they have been, for example, yeah, when I started in the region still in the 80s, 90s, you know, when the agricultural frontier was still advancing. But yeah, I mean, overall, it's a mixture between smallholders, government projects, tourism, and also depending a little bit where, you know, I mean, in Calakmul, it's not that bad with the deforestation because, I mean, agricultural lands are so bad. I mean, other regions are already terribly deforested, so there is not much forest left. But, you know, I mean, these are basically the drivers.
And then the role of different...
You can talk about the Mennonites. But
yeah, the role of different identities and actors in that is probably really dependent on their on-the-ground perspectives and experiences of what a deforestation or forest removal dynamic actually is. For example, if you are participating in shifting land use, you might consider many stages of forest regeneration and ages of forest regeneration as forest or as land use, depending on kind of where you're from. So whereas if I'm a government person, I'm being very coarse with this, by the way, very, very general. If I'm a government biologist and I saw second growth, I would think degraded. That place was deforested, bad. So that your role in that and your discourse about that definitely depends on your personal experience in production. So, and that's something that's pretty interesting in a lot of these communities is they come from all over. Ejidos aren't just indigenous folks. So that's definitely something that plays a role.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. So I think we are like a bit over time, but thank you so much for all your patience and for being with us like extended after one. It was really insightful, all your approaches, and yeah, thank you so much.
It's wonderful to learn with both of you, and sorry that we all missed each other at GLP, but it's great to hear about this work and looking forward to following it in the future as well. I have a lot of questions, wrote down a lot of notes, and might be following up by email with some other questions, but thank you so much for your time and for participating today.
yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Bye.
Have a great day. Be well.
Bye-bye to everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Ciao.
Mm.